And we're live.
Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are live now in this YouTube live stream debate. We're very excited. We've got three fantastic speakers. You can say hello, everybody. Give everybody a wave.
Hi.
And we're going to be talking about climate change and loss of biodiversity. I'm going to quickly summarize how this project came about. I live in Brighton in England, and a few friends of ours who were feeling very out of touch and very helpless with the situation of climate change. We decided that we wanted to make connections with more people, and on top of that, we really wanted to know the most effective things that we can do and everyone to tackle this big issue. So what better way to get people involved that have great experience and are qualified to answer these questions. Quickly, I'll just introduce Sam and Luke. Sam, can you just say hi for a moment and say what you're all about?
Hi everyone. Yeah, along with Tom and Luke, we're both very passionate about climate change and biodiversity loss. So we've helped to set up this thing, inviting some of these experts. On the side, I run a project called 8 Billion Minds, which is to do with creating a worldwide live learning platform. So that's about education, but of course, the main thing that we're all interested in is about climate, because we are a ship going towards an iceberg.
Certainly true. And Luke, can you just say how you're helping with the tech and what you're...
So I'm a filmmaker and a social entrepreneur, and just feel deeply passionate about how we can be more in touch with our planet, on which we so intimately depend, and yeah, ultimately have an economy and a society that regenerates our planet and non-human nature, as well as human invented concepts and things. So yeah, really glad to be part of this experiment to explore new ways we can inspire more actions for people to take away to be part of the solution. Thanks.
Great. I'm a comedian. I've got my serious hat on today though. Can I just make sure that we've got everybody on board and that we can hear everybody speaking, because it looks like maybe some people are muted.
Well, Neil just muted because he had some background noise going on.
Okay, let's get straight to it and start with Gemma. Could you introduce who you are and everything about yourself in as short time as possible, if such a thing is possible?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Gemma Deer. I am a postdoctoral researcher in the environmental humanities. I'm currently based at the Harvard University Centre for the Environment, doing a 2-year research project here. Although I did my doctorate at the University of Sussex in Brighton. And so I have a literature philosophy background, but kind of from about my master's and through my PhD, I really got interested in the environment. And so while I do still study literature, it's kind of really with this environmental angle. And so I'm very much interested in the way that kind of narrative and human psychology play a really important role in how we respond to these issues.
Fantastic. That sounds fascinating. Mexi, could I go to you next? Tell us about yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Mexi. I have a PhD in geography and human geography, and I focus mainly on the connections between political economy and the environment. So I look at kind of neoliberalism and conservation, the contradictions involved in market-based approaches to environmentalism, that kind of thing. I've started a YouTube channel. So on the channel, I talk mainly about these things like political ecology, etc., capitalism, climate, environment, veganism. I'm a vegan also. That's part of my environmentalism as well. And I also host a podcast called The Vegan Vanguard, which explores similar themes.
Not least, Neil Davidson. We can't hear you at the moment. Is there anything that we can press there? You might have to unmute yourself. We'll leave you to fiddle around with that.
Oh, there we go.
And then if you, oh, there we go. Try that. That's better. Is there anything we can press there? You might have to unmute yourself.
Forgive me, guys. You can tell I'm the oldest one here. I'm having difficulties with the technology. I'm getting massive feedback.
Around with that.
Just checking, Neil. Have you got something else going on your computer which is sending out the sound? It seems like you might have another tab open on your browser.
Yeah, if you just make sure that your volume is turned down a little bit, then that means we won't get this background noise. So turn your volume down, but don't turn your microphone off.
Like you might have another tab open on your browser.
I've just taken the liberty of muting you for a moment there, Neil. I've also noticed that we've got a few people just joined us, and maybe this is a good time, Tom, if you want to just do like a 15-second little re-intro for these new people who've just joined, like what we're doing.
This is also the perfect time to start with our first question. If you've just joined us, we're talking about climate change and loss of biodiversity, arguably the most important issue that we are facing, certainly as a species. And I'd like to ask our listeners to comment as we go and give us feedback. And we'll start by asking our guests, if you had to choose one thing as the most effective action that people in general can take to help this problem, what would you feel would be the best, most effective thing? Would anyone like to take that one first? I'm going to choose someone then. Gemma. Oh, Mexi, you've come up as breathing heavily. Go on then, Mexi. Is that the passion that I can feel?
Well, choosing one thing is incredibly difficult. I actually have about 5, major categories written down. I'm going to cheat a little bit and give one thing that I think people can do individually, and then one thing that I think people can do, as a form of resistance collectively, because I think we need to focus mainly on systemic change and not individual action or consumer behavior. Obviously these problems have been caused by consumerism and capitalism, so we're not going to change that by individual action alone. However, a very easy thing that everyone can do to help reduce their carbon footprint would be to reduce their meat consumption. So I always throw that out because, a lot of times we think about the climate crisis, it seems so overwhelming to the point that it paralyzes us. It makes us feel like, we have no agency, we can't do anything. And this is one thing that people can do that, it's not going to solve the problem by itself, but it will very much help. So I would say reducing meat consumption is a really important one. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and that's also not a very difficult thing really to do.
Right.
I guess it's easier for me in Brighton. We've got more vegetarian, vegan restaurants and things, but it's achievable as a goal for anyone, I would say.
Exactly, right. So if you're looking for something simple that you can do that doesn't feel, completely overwhelming, this is definitely a place to start. And then in terms of collective resistance, I really like this idea of a general strike. I know Earth Strike is, I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but they're planning a general strike for next year all across the globe. Extinction Rebellion, the Yellow Jackets, etc. I think that we really need to disrupt. I'm from Canada, and I would say if you are from Canada or America or a settler colonial state, supporting Indigenous resistance is key, right? So disrupting the ability for major pipeline infrastructure to be put in place, disrupting the ability for, in Canada, the tar sands, for that oil to get to market. We have to make it either impossible or just highly, unprofitable for governments and these companies to actually get this oil and this infrastructure to market or built. So I just wanted to shout out a few really important sites of resistance in Canada right now. There's the Unistoten camp, and they are trying to stop a gas link, a natural gas pipeline from going through their traditional territory. I can post links in the comment box below if people want to support them. But yeah, I definitely think just disruption, supporting Indigenous resistance, and getting involved with these kinds of strikes. I mean, the youth as well, Greta Thunberg, inspiring the youth to get out and strike from school. I think that, what are people going to do when there's 12 and 13-year-old kids out in the street striking? I mean, at that point, what do you do?
That's
right?
Great. Thanks so much. I'm going to pass over my chairing to Sam now. Sam, can you ask another guest the same question? We'll try and keep the answers as concise as possible. It would be great to have a large number of actions that people can do by the end of this, and put them into some sort of order of what we think is important. Can I pass that over to you, Sam?
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you very much. So, Megzi, that was great stuff there. I think you touched upon a very important thing about the fact that we have to have systemic change, and reducing meat is obviously a very important thing as well. Gemma, would you like to introduce yourself again, perhaps say where you are at the moment, and also answer perhaps the top one or few things that people could do to fight this?
Sure. Okay, so yeah, I'm Gemma O'Dear. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the Harvard University Center for the Environment. And just kind of, I don't know, to not quite directly answer your question, but I just want to respond a little bit to what Mexi said. So obviously going vegan is really, really, or not necessarily even going vegan, decreasing your meat consumption is really important and a great action, but actually a really huge emitter of greenhouse gas is food waste. So there's a organization called Project Drawdown that's done this huge analysis on all the ways in which we can actually change it so that we are drawing down more greenhouse gases than we're emitting. And number 3 on that list, so above having a plant-based diet, is reducing food waste, because we throw so much food away, and this, as it decomposes, emits methane, which is of course a really powerful greenhouse gas. So and actually, if you look at their research, in their top 20, only 5 of the top 20 are to do with energy generation, and 8 are to do with food production. So yeah, I think food as a broad topic is probably one of the biggest ways that we can affect change.
I just want to interrupt there, and because I know that Mexi has to leave us in about 5 minutes. So before we continue having the debate, is there anything else that you think is really important that we should know about? Actions that people can take, ones that are both maybe have ones that are really quick and easy, and other ones that are more take more organization. Is there anything that you haven't mentioned that you think is really important?
Well, I could probably stay like 10 more minutes, I would say, but
okay. Should we jump to?
In that case, I would propose that we give Neil this opportunity.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Finally introduce himself now. Sounds sorted.
Yeah. So I think we've got to say that, Neil, am I correct to say it's 4:30 where you are right now?
Oh, no. It's far after 4:30 now. It's almost 5:15 a.m. The sun is thinking about coming up shortly. Yeah, hi, my name's Neil Davidson. I'm speaking to you from Aboriginal land that was unceded of the Turrbal and Jagera people here in Brisbane, Australia. It's just before dawn. The kookaburras are calling outside, the lorikeets have started, and the fig birds have started, so I've got the door open in case one of them wants to come in. As you can probably tell from my lack of hair, I'm probably one of the oldest ones in this group, and I imagine we're speaking to a fairly mixed audience. I've worked in the oil industry in the 80s, I've worked in local government, I've worked in state government, I've worked in entrepreneurial groups, I've tried to assist sustainability startups, I've worked with community groups, conservation groups, And so I can bring a very broad systemic perspective to the issues here. And one of the biggest issues that I think that we have is that it's a lack of ecological consciousness, full stop. The people that are making decisions in many cases are unable to see what we find so important. And so in the absence of that ecological consciousness, they don't see the impacts of the incremental damage and the collective damage and the cumulative damage. And then they become resistant to the science because their job tells them they're not allowed to actually recognize the science, because we pay them and incentivize them not to recognize the science. And so we have huge barriers. And to me, the biggest barriers are actually social barriers. We've got the technologies, we know how to organize. I've been supporting the students' marches. I think it's important to have some older faces in the crowd and to know they're being supported. I'm in awe every time I see a young student, 9, 11-year-olds, stand up and speak on the back of a utility in front of our Parliament House about the challenges that we've faced and the inability of the adults, presumably adults behind them, to do anything about it. I've tried to help legislation get through, and I've seen that rise, make a difference, and then be removed by succeeding governments. So for over 30 years, I've been campaigning in this space. As a frustrated change agent and systems thinker, I'm now putting my energies into areas to do with food security and bioregional redevelopment and regeneration. My sense is that those places in the world that recognise the need most deeply, those that are already being affected, are crying out for assistance from those of us that have the skills and the capability to do that. But most of the funding streams are aimed in the opposite direction, towards deliberate, continuous short-term exploitation. So in that context, in terms of individual versus collective, individual action depends on where you're at, and depends on where you're at both physically and in terms of your consciousness, and in terms of your capability and maturity, and in terms of your ability to pull levers. Find a lever, pull it. Join a group that's pulling levers, find one that speaks to your heart, join it. If it's not the right group, find another group. This is about self-organisation to build critical mass, to shift the system. Individual actions are important, the cumulative actions are more important, and I think we need to work out how we're going to bring that all together. And part of my role is as a humble servant to try and assist those that are walking this path, because believe me, I know it's not easy, and I know what you're up against. So thank you very much for having me here today.
Absolutely great. Thank you very much, Neil. Have we got any follow-on questions from that? If anyone's watching this at the moment, please feel free to ask questions in the chat next to the panel. We will pick those up and ask them to these speakers for you. I don't want to break this amazing discussion. Jenna, Mexi, have you got anything to say on the back of this? On the fact that we need, there's lots of barriers to social, biggest barriers to social barrier, lack of ecological conscious.
Yeah, I mean, I would say definitely there's social barriers. There's also definitely political and economic barriers. You know, I mean, it's difficult for people if you're working 2-3 jobs, you're barely surviving, right? It's hard to find time to even join these groups. So there's a lot of ways that people become disenfranchised. I also think there's an issue around, I guess Gemma probably knows more about this, but yeah, claiming the narrative. I mean, I really like what's going on with the Yellow Jackets in France, because although at first, you know, people were saying, oh, this is just a strike against climate action, actually it's a strike against austerity. Actually, their demands are quite progressive, and it's about, you know, yes, we do want carbon taxes, but we want the polluters to pay. We want the wealthy to pay. We don't want this to fall on, you know, already disenfranchised or already struggling working people who can't actually shoulder all of this by themselves, you know? So I think that, you know, making sure that when things are proposed, like, you know, taxes or climate action like that, that we're actually vigilant in making sure that it's implemented in ways that are progressive and that are, you know, not going to penalize the people who are not actually causing the problem, right? I also think that in addition to attacking the systems that are causing these problems, I think we also need to build. So we need to be tearing those down collectively, tearing down everything that's not working, but then also coming together to try and prefigure the world that we do want to see. So, maybe supporting cooperatives, supporting movements, or, community building that seeks to furnish the needs of communities in decommodified ways, or in ways that don't rely on the elites or the corporations or things like that, so that as we're tearing all of this down, we have networks in place to hold each other up, and to do things in alternative ways, so that we have something there once what we don't want is torn down. I hope that's making sense. And lastly, I think that we need to do a lot more in terms of linking disparate struggles that might seem not related to one another, but feminist movements, anti-racist movements, decolonial movements, etc., that really all have a stake in transforming these systems to ones that will make sense for people in the planet. And I think that even anti-fascist action and movements, because I know there's a very there's the rise of the alt-right and fascists everywhere in Canada as well. Actually, the Yellow Jackets in Canada are completely fascist. They're really co-opting the narrative over here. And so there's a stake in joining together these struggles, so that we're all working for the same thing in the end, I suppose.
Perhaps I can jump in there. So obviously, all these kind of different groups that have a stake in it, that's completely right. But I think what no one has mentioned yet today is the fact that the kind of the center right, so the kind of a big portion of the population who aren't really engaged in this, and where climate change doesn't really register as that much of a concern. And although I completely applaud all these movements and activism groups, we really need to get kind of the majority of society behind this, obviously, because it's such a big problem. So I think something that's really important for these groups, for any activists, for anyone who's really wanting to make a change, is to learn how to understand and communicate with those people who don't really share your beliefs already. So when we start talking about kind of an energy revolution and saving the planet, all of this language really instantly alienates anyone who identifies as center-right, because they just immediately hear those words and it's like this socialist alarm bell of, and then they're going to discount everything that you say. So I think we really need to learn how to communicate with those people in a more effective way. There was a report released recently by Climate Outreach that kind of did research on the kind of language that's actually more effective with communicating with the center right. And you have to use their language if you want them to listen to you, because going into an argument never changes anyone's mind. You have to present it on their own terms. So using terms like stability and moderation and order and duty and right and security, and obviously I just sound like I'm reading kind of the Tory party election campaign history right now, but there's a reason why they use that language. So if you can present kind of clean energy as part of the progress of our stable civilization, that's going to appeal to them much more than saying, okay, we need an energy revolution. And if you start criticizing capitalism, you're instantly going to get closed ears. And I think that kind of division that is really, really inherent in the kind of environmentalist discourse, not that people are intending to do that, but just the way that it is, that's something that we really need to address. We need to work together, and that kind of means leveling the playing field and kind of getting on the same terms as the people who don't really disagree with us.
I'd agree with that in terms of the need for that social interaction at the level of the conversation that's occurring. And when I said before, there are social barriers and consciousness barriers that occurs within individuals, that also occurs within communities. My role most recently has been going into communities and listening, keynote listening, and then lifting the conversation based on the cues that I'm picking up from their conversation. Quite often, the intergenerational differences don't allow people to show up whole in their own communities. I've gone into farming communities where the fathers and fathers-in-law on one side of the room are drinking beers from their pots, and the women, the 30 to 35-year-old daughters and daughters-in-law are sitting on the other side of the room drinking their Chardonnay. The fathers think things are going well. The daughters are saying, "Dad, the town's failing." And one is, still working from the extractive economy. The other is recognizing that the social and environmental systems are failing. They'll drive you around their property and point to a tree that's flowering 5 months early, but they can't admit in front of their parents that climate change is happening. And yet their parents know it as well. So it's easier to set up a straw man argument against the greenies in the cities that are changing the politics, which are imposing the rules on the water, which then are changing the way we can extract our economy, while at the same time, we've actually got people in those communities recognizing that failure is occurring. And so to deeply empathize with them and to appeal to their hearts is really critical. To pick the right time to introduce art, poetry, to actually appeal to their emotions. Drew Dellinger's wonderful poem, Hieroglyphic Stairway. What did you do once you knew? Right? And so when you hold people accountable to their ethical responsibilities in their own systems, then they see it. What they don't want you to do is come and challenge their existing economy because they've spent their lives making that and they're trying to defend that. So we need to empathize with those that can't see that yet. I'm not religious, but I've worked with Sisters of Mercy and others. The Pope is talking about changing the narrative. Laudato Si is an impressive document that actually speaks to cry of earth, cry of the poor. The Sisters of Mercy see the two as connected, right? We are in a common ecological crisis caused by the inequities in the system and the inability to see and empathize with those human and other than human that are being affected by our behaviors. And so by balancing this, by changing that narrative, to change the narrative, you need to disrupt coherence. You can do that in the way that's been talked about here, but disrupting coherence compassionately requires going in and gently lifting people to a different level of thinking, a different level of consciousness. And if you can do that with individuals, fantastic. If you can do that in a group, it changes every outcome from that point forward. Because from that point forward, diverse groups will suddenly realize that's no longer the priority, that's the priority. And it shifts the resourcing, it changes the direction of the resourcing. And in terms of what somebody said earlier, it creates a gradient between what we don't want towards what we do want. And ultimately, we're looking at the anticipatory design of communities that can be viable with the changes we know are coming. It's not good enough to just plant stuff that was growing yesterday. We have to start thinking about what we're going to plant tomorrow, and that includes governance. And so to me, listening very carefully to what you're hearing, not responding straight with the normal script, hearing, feeling, holding those people safe, and then lifting the game when you can, and take it slow. Because some of these things, if you go in too hard, you will be rejected, and then you're persona non grata, and then you're useless as a leader in that community. And so work out how to go in on the arms of trusted elders, work in how to go in to actually help shift, find those people in those communities that know they already want to shift but can't even speak out, and work with them. And so I'm honoured to work with communities that are trying to do that and to assist them as an external catalyst to do what they know they need to do. How do we let them do what they know they need to do? And how do we enable them to do that? And that's what I try to do with that empowerment process. Thank you.
Wow. Just to bring in a bit from the audience here, you can see Kate Jeffrey is inspired by what you're saying there, Neil. Also, Terry has been patiently waiting with a question that I've been looking for an opportunity to bring in. So I'll wheel that one in if I may. Just before that, we've got a bunch of new people who've just joined. So I just want to welcome you lot. This is also recorded if you want to catch up on the beginning of it. But if you're thinking, where am I? We are just experimenting with the first one of these live streams, looking at what can we do to help to play a role in tackling climate change and biodiversity loss. it's huge, it's overwhelming, there's a lot about it that's quite distressing. Maybe we can come together and share some really tangible, actionable things we can take away and do to feel part of the solution. And that's what these live streams were about. This is the first one. Welcome. So Terry was saying, I agree with you, Neil, but question, how do we influence doubting politicians? So to you or to anyone else who feels called to respond to that.
And perhaps
Mexi, would like to go before me? Yeah.
Perhaps Mexi, you can answer that question, or anything else on your mind. And the question was, how do we influence doubting politicians? Or if you want to take the conversation to a new area.
How do we influence doubting politicians? I don't know. I mean, the thing is that I'm not sure that politicians are legitimately doubting. I think that politicians often have a number of reasons why they aren't acting, that it may seem like they are doubting, or I don't know. I guess I'm a little bit cynical where I think that, people have other reasons for quote unquote doubting or not acting. I guess I'm thinking about Justin Trudeau in Canada, and he got in on a very green platform, but then pretty much reneged on what he said he was going to do. And now he's forcing through a lot of these pipelines through Indigenous lands that, was clearly not part of his platform to begin with. But he got elected, and he's kind of in this position of, well, we have to balance jobs and conservation. We have to balance development and saving the planet. And so I'm not sure. I mean, I think changing the material conditions would be most effective. I suppose if we could make the case that, in Canada, especially, relying on extractivism is not a really good long-term strategy for our economy, because basically at this point in late-stage capitalism, many politicians have to do what they have to do to create jobs and increase the economy, et cetera. So if we could put it into terms of, a good strategy would be to get into the green energy sector, or to transition people working in the tar sands into some kind of green energy or ecological restoration or something like that, because, nobody wants to buy that oil, and it's incredibly difficult to get it to market, especially with all of this Indigenous resistance across the country. So, I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult to get politicians to do anything or to care if they're kind of dealing with, the broader political economy. But I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I'm hopefully the other speakers have some better ideas for how to reach politicians.
Jenna?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'd say it comes down to language and framing again. So if you're writing to a politician or speaking directly to a politician, again, get on their level. If you're writing to someone who's on the right, then there's no point in framing it in a kind of leftist, heavily environmentalist way, because they're just not going to listen. But more than that, if we do believe in our democracy, and of course it is broken in so many ways, but these people are there to represent the people. So the more people that you talk to that are not politicians, that don't already share your views, as you start to kind of get more people demanding, okay, we want clean air for our children, we want a secure future, these don't have to be framed as saving the planet or climate change. It can really be put into that different narrative. And as more people on the right start to realize that actually doing these things are going to be good for their children, good for the economy. So the Project Drawdown thing that I mentioned before, when they've done kind of estimates for if we implement all of these ideas that they've got over the next 30 years, then there's a net saving of $74 trillion in GDP, which is obviously a huge amount. And it's good for the economy. It's good for those people too. If we do all these things, it doesn't matter whether you believe in climate change or not. So I think really think of different ways you can address this, and never underestimate how just small small conversations can, you know, start to bleed and make change. You're never going to kind of change a whole society's mind in a day or a week or something, but really just kind of keep pushing and having these conversations with people.
Spot on, Jenna, and in fact, picking up on the small conversations for addressing doubting politicians. It's a bit of a punctuated equilibrium, the politician cycle. Once you've been elected, you have to sort of somehow hold the promises that you've made to whoever it was that funded you to get to that point. And so you're almost trapped in a path dependency for the duration of your course in office. So it's almost behind the scenes. It's already too late by the time the politician's elected if they've already been corrupted by that process. In Australia, we've had several situations where independents have risen to overthrow sitting members that had quite substantial majorities. And this has happened through exactly that process that you've just been describing, kitchen table conversations that have started to identify the issues from the grassroots political level that people want to see addressed. And in one particular case, in the Albury-Wodonga area, sorry, it's not Albury and Wodonga, it's in the Victorian side, which is the Wodonga side of the Murray River. We had a sitting politician from a very strongly anti-renewables, pro-coal perspective, who was thrown out of office by an independent because she refused to listen to the community group that actually went to appeal to her. They weren't trying to oust her at that stage. They were saying, these are the issues that we have raised in our community. What she did instead was to say, I don't want to hear you. So at the 11th hour, this community group that had spent many, many hours having conversations had to choose a person to represent them. They did, and because she'd had those conversations, she was elected. So now she's sitting in government as an independent, carrying the hopes, concerns, and ideas of her community, not the hopes, ideas, and concerns of those with the vested interest of maintaining business as usual. And so at that level, it's really important that the critical conversations and joining up those conversations shifts the political landscape. It won't happen overnight. It's a different approach to the stand up in the streets and protest, but that's also needed. So we need multiple levers here. The doubting politicians need to see that there are numbers that are growing and swelling and changing in the way that the political landscape is shifting. At the same time, they need to know that they're under threat from people that have better ideas and deeper understandings of their own communities. And at the same time, they need to be shown alternative models to move forward that allow them to save face as they backtrack, because many of them are still holding on to this hero mentality of, I need to be strong to what I said I was elected for, rather than, you're right, the system has changed, we need to be getting on board with this. And in Australia, it's the dinosaurs that are still holding it back by holding the rest of the government to account. And in case you haven't noticed, I think we're on Prime Minister number 7, 8 in the last 10 years. So this is not an easy ball to carry for anybody that tries to come in with any sort of progressive agenda. It's not even an easy ball for somebody to carry with a non-progressive agenda. And so politics is not necessarily the answer, but the small-time conversations that generate real democracy are the answer. And we need to find alternative ways of participative democracy that help to shift the whole system. And that's starting to happen in small places, leading into cooperatives, leading into alternative approaches, but ultimately looking towards alternative anticipatory design of what communities need and how they need to be governed to manage the 21st century, because otherwise they will fail. They are failing already. As it's said quite often from a technological perspective, the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. The same applies to climate change. The same applies to communities that are failing. There are places that have already failed, there are places that are failing now, there are places that will fail very soon. Those are the ones that are crying out most for the new models. Once those new models become more successful, if we can bring them back from the brink, then we will flip the model, because others will be saying, why can't we have what they've got? So there's a socially ecological entrepreneurial step here, which is we have to show how we're taking linked social ecological systems, which means governance as well as the ecology, into systems that are life generating, not life destroying. And thanks for your question.
Great stuff, Neil. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so
Can
for
I bring in
the
a couple of audience questions, just if it's a good time. Just want to make you aware of them. Yeah,
I actually have to go soon. Sorry.
Okay.
I have to teach a class.
Do you want to share any parting words, Maxi, before you're off? Or?
Well, I see one of the questions was about how do we influence neoliberal politicians who are trying to use fuel taxes as part of climate change policy instead of properly chasing companies. And I mean, I think that's where the protest bit comes out. I mean, you know, the Yellow Jackets are making it very impossible for that government or those neoliberal, or Macron, the neoliberal politician, to ignore that, you know. And I think that I really like the idea of having that strike be continuous, because often we think about, you know, movements as just a one-time thing, or everyone comes out for one day. But when the governments or politicians know that, no, this is going to be a recurring thing, like every Friday, every Saturday, until we meaningfully address this in some way, or, you know, appease people in some way, they know that they just have, you know, 6 days until the next action, right? And I really like that idea of just keeping that pressure up instead of just having this one-time movement that they can easily just kind of, you know, look the other way, or think like, oh, well, you know, we'll do this, or, you know, I really like keeping that pressure on. So yeah, that's what I would say. And it also, I think I find it really energizing to participate in those kinds of, you know, marches or protest movements. It really, just on a personal level, it makes you feel like you do have agency and you are part of something bigger that is, you know, a lot of people that agree with you, that actually want to work with you to make this world a better place. And I find that just really inspiring. So I guess that's what I would say to that. And I'm very sorry that I can't stay. I have to go and teach a class. So yeah, but thank you so much for inviting me on. I think this was a really great conversation, and I really appreciate what the other two speakers have said. It's given me a lot to think about. And yeah, everyone should join Extinction Rebellion.
Thanks very much, Mexi. And thank you. The name of your channel, Mexi, if anyone would like to see more?
It's just Mexi, so MEXIE is my channel, and my podcast is veganvanguardpodcast.com.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Mexi.
you. Thanks a lot.
Great. Okay, so for those that have just joined us, we are currently looking at all the different ways that we can perhaps have an effect on mitigating climate change and the biodiversity loss. So I think we have another nice question from the audience. This one is, isn't it true that the global warming runaway effect is already underway, and that the political tipping points has already been met? So I'll say that in a better way. Is it too late? Has global warming reached a point in which it's too late now to put pressure on politicians to do anything about it? And that can be to either of you two.
You like to go first?
Oh, do you want to go, Neil? Or?
No, would you like to go first? I'm just suffering.
Okay. So it looks like if you read the last IPCC report, it does look like we are going past certain tipping points. But I think the idea that it's too late and we may as well just give up is really just kind of is not helpful at all. So okay, we might already be locked into a certain amount of warming. We've already lost a lot of species. There's a lot of animals endangered. You know, the situation with coral is really bad. The ocean is getting to a point where it's not going to be possible for it to survive. So, of course, in some senses, it is too late. But, you know, we could either kind of pull on the brakes now and start to reverse things a little bit, or we could just carry on to full-blown catastrophe. So in the October IPCC report, they give kind of three different scenarios for what we could do. So there's like a best case, a mid case, and a worst case scenario of kind of what we do between now and the end of the century. And the differences between them are, of course, massive. So, you know, yeah, we're already locked into a certain amount of change, but the idea that we should just give up because of that is really ridiculous. And of course, like hope is, and kind of our own sense of agency within the crisis is what we're here for and what we're working for.
Thanks, Jen. Are you happy for me to go? This is a really challenging one, especially when you've been fighting in the trenches now for quite a long time and trying to shift systems from inside and out. And there's days that it makes it very hard to get up. There's a grieving process, I think, that we need to go through for those things that we have lost and that we are losing. People here might be aware of the term solastalgia, like nostalgia, but solastalgia is the loss of solace, the sense of the loss of security of a place that you knew as a child. I know Aboriginal people that will drive around the Hunter Valley coal mining region because they can't stand to go through their country that has been so despoiled and so destroyed. Communities all over the world are looking at the damage being done. It's currently couched in terms of the utilitarian impact on water supply or on population growth or food security. But deep down, as I said before, this is a consciousness issue. The consciousness is that the systems on which we depend now require us to step in to regenerate. We've done so much damage. So the hard part is to hold the grief of what we're losing and the potential that we could be over those tipping points, and the possibility that we can unlock that potential by these sorts of conversations and by lifting people out of their individual grieving processes into collective, okay, we realize this is happening, now what? And so much of this is around self-organisation at the individual level and self-organisation at the next level of organisation, small groups, small community groups, bigger groups. Some of that will be expressed, as we've talked about before, as resistance. Some of that is already being expressed as proactive anticipatory design. You know, we have many of the technologies that we require to draw down the CO2 in the atmosphere, or at least to slow down its rate of production. And the biggest one we have, of course, is photosynthesis in terms of planting. The question then is, how do we design those plantings in ways that are most beneficial to humans and other than humans? So we can, I believe, regenerate the whole planet if we were to start. Of course, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Right, the next best time is today. So think about how this works. Find those people that are doing that sort of work. Tipping points have come throughout history and they will come again. Some of those we can't do anything about. This is one we can do something about. Okay, but it comes down to our individual and collective agency and our individual and collective capability and maturity and our willingness to move forward. I'm aware, and I know there was an earlier question that talked about those that are trapped inside the system. This is the system trap that incentivizes you to continue to do what you know is not good for yourself or your children. Right? In those cases, if you've got that cognitive dissonance, think seriously about how to get out, because your heart is being destroyed in those places. Your will is being destroyed in those places. You need to find somewhere else to spend your energies. Find something that's generative, get involved with that, because when you've got the threat and the spectre of such massive change that's going to impact you, those you love, and those that might follow you or not, then you need to find ways to act. There are multiple small scale through to very large scale movements, and there's multiple things you can do individually in your own households through to whole communities. So I have to hold both the potential reality of collapse and the potential possibility in being able to enable people. And I see my role as helping to hold both of those and help shift people towards the generative. And my heart is out to all those who feel this as deeply as I do, because I know what it feels like.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Neil,
Thanks, Neil.
I love that new word, solastalgia. That's a great word. I think we should be promoting and putting everywhere, and politicians should be talking about that. Okay, great. So I think we've got time for about one more question, perhaps. So I think after that, the feeling of the pessimism and the depression of what we've done to our planet, perhaps now we can use that to find out what are the main things that our viewers should be doing, and perhaps and this ties into one of the questions: what is the smallest thing that people can do to make a big difference. And we've touched upon many already, but if there's any on your mind of a few things that people should be doing, perhaps there should be a bullet point list or something like this that everyone should go away with a few key points.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things with me, Tom, and Sam were talking about, actually building an ever-growing kind of list of just not stuff you have to or should do to fix the planet, but just, you know, here's some ideas. And I love what Gemma and Neil and Mex have already touched on. We've covered quite a few different things, and I love how it spanned from art and poetry all the way to big picture system change and political work to just getting on the streets. And you know, there's so many different ways to make a meaningful contribution. I wanted to chuck in just one real quick of mine. There's something called S3, which stands for Sociocracy 3.0. And it's a kind of toolkit for teams and organizations to use to improve how they collaborate. And it's quite attractive even to primarily for-profit corporates, which really excites me, that the conversation can go beyond organizations that are already progressive and forward-thinking and whatever you might call it, more conscious or focused on more compassionate towards people and planet. You know, this is reaching all kinds of huge multinational corporations, and it is a way of hearing more voices in decision making and essentially getting more power and responsibility and agency to the different people in an organization. And those bigger corporates kind of solve this idea because they can see how powerful that is in harnessing the collective intelligence in the group. And motivating people to care more about the work that they're doing and do a better job with a more crow's nest view of what are we all actually here doing together and to achieve. But the long-term result of it, I think, is that people become more passionate about what their collective goal is. So I feel like S3 is one really powerful thing that you can start to bring into any size organization to actually start changing the DNA of that organization as well as making it more effective.
And do you want to post a link to that, perhaps, Luke, in the chat next to the thing? That'd be great. So,
thanks.
Yeah, Jenna and Neil, would you like to perhaps expand on the key things that our viewers and everyone should be doing? Okay.
So just to kind of very briefly go over the main things that we've talked about. One of the biggest things is food. So as Mexi was saying, having a plant-based diet, which doesn't necessarily mean going completely vegan or vegetarian. If that feels impossible for you, then then just decreasing the amount of meat and dairy that you consume is gonna help a lot. And then also, as I said, food waste is a huge one. So not only food waste in the home, but we have a massive problem with supermarkets in the UK. So, you know, writing to politicians, supermarkets about the way that they waste loads of food is going to be another way. And then the second big thing that I've talked about is talking to people, especially people that don't necessarily already share your beliefs. One way to kind of strategize on this is go and educate yourself on something that's called confirmation bias. So we all have this, it's kind of inbuilt in our psychology. It means that we assimilate information that already accords with our worldview, and we reject anything that comes from a different worldview. This means that people who are not kind of environmental leftists are not going to listen to what you say if you frame it in those terms. So maybe I can post some links as well on this climate outreach document that kind of tells you how to speak to those kinds of people. And then one other thing that I thought of when Neil was talking before was one of the biggest problems I think with effective democracy at the moment is that young people are still not voting enough. So, you know, young people in the majority do care about the environment, they do believe in climate change, and yet a lot of them don't vote. When we look at, you know, the EU referendum, a very big proportion of the voters were the much older sector of the population. So decreasing voter apathy in young people, I think, is really important. Can you get involved with teenagers, school groups, young people in your community, and kind of make them understand how important it is to engage in democracy? And then, you know, we'll have a new generation who are actually gonna use the power that they have.
Wonderful, Jenna. Yes, I'd build on that and say that again, taking it from the micro to the macro, from the individual perspective, make yourself conscious. If you've tuned into this, if you're listening to this, then already you're aware of the issue. The question is, what can you then do? So where is your agency? And obviously your food choices, conscious choices in purchase. You get to know a garden, get to know a farmer, you know, grow your own plants, identify what plants need to grow, identify what plants will grow in the future, you know, build up that systemic understanding from the micro out. If you have the capacity to make a difference with other forms of context-based leadership, whether it be in small groups, in faith groups, in community groups. So work out, how can I make my voice heard? How can I lift the game? How can I make others aware? Because once others are aware, you're then appealing to their ethics, not just to their ignorance. So if they're not aware, adopt them, educate them, bring them up to speed. If they are aware, ask them, what are you doing? This is what I'm doing. So you have to lead by example, right? So be the change is so critical to this. Demonstrating what you are doing within your agency. When you can't do that, how do we enable the shift to happen through our expression as collectives, such as the political processes we've talked about? Identify the candidate that best meets the future needs of you and your community, not the one that you've always voted for, your parents voted for, that might still be pretending that the economy can continue, because the current economies generally can't. And so if you've then got the capacity to go to the next level, you know, can you influence a university? Can you provide a course? Can you convene a group? Do you have facilitation skills? Can you hold a safe space for people to grieve? Can you create places where art can be expressive and then bring that art back out into the community so they can see, wow, these artifacts were created with love and with grief for what we're doing, which then raises the awareness of others. So there's beautiful little ways that you can signal your concern, and it's in every action that you take. And without getting too deep into consciousness, when we recognize that everything is connected, we recognize that we are the cause, we are the enemy, we have met the enemy and it is us. At the same time, we are part of a system which currently is destructive, and we have the agency to shift that. Seems hard on your own, so couple with friends that can do it together, and then go into places where you can make a difference because you've got the solidarity to show we're taking a different stance, this is possible. You won't convince the whole group, but there will be individuals that are ready to make that leap and they will join you. And that's how momentum shifts. Thank you.
Amazing, Neil. That's really awesome. Both answers, Jen and Neil, were super. Then thank you so much. So I believe that we are pretty much at the end now. Massive thanks to all of you for being here. Now, what can our viewers do right now? Well, please join the Facebook group. The name is Climate Change Action live stream events. We'll hopefully be hosting many more of these and inviting definitely all of these speakers back another time. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you have as well. We'll be posting a summary of what's been going on to the group, so you can see some things you can do then. But how about taking this on right now and join a group yourself? Find some action. Email that politician to put pressure on the supermarkets to not waste food. Have a plant-based diet. Be conscious of your food choices and get to know your farmer. I like that.
Join your local Extinction Rebellion group. That's so many.
And let us know back here what you've done, because the feedback loop is what grows momentum.
Yes. In fact, actually, if people, I would like to invite two things, and whatever is easier for viewers, which by the way is peaking now, thanks to everyone who's joined. If you want to add either of these two things, either in the chat on the YouTube page or in the Facebook group that I've just linked to. One, feedback on this live stream. How was it? Anything you would change, anything that would make it more exciting, engaging, impactful for you? Welcome that feedback. It's our first one, and we want them to get better and better. Number two, any actions that you're planning to take away, we'd love to know and share that, and it may inspire other people.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. I'm about to walk out into the almost dawn of Brisbane and enjoy the wildlife which has started to gather. Forgive me for my early technical glitches. I wasn't aware I have to download some software, and also forgive the feedback system. But I hope that what I've provided is some insights from an older warrior at the coalface, if that's not the wrong expression, trying to make a difference. And if anybody needs any assistance, mentorship, ideas, feel free to be in touch, and I'll do my best to provide whatever I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. Any links or plugs that you want to make to the projects, or people who want to follow what you're doing or get involved in any way, here's an opportunity to shout that out as well.
Currently working with a group called Blue Ring, which is trying to develop processes for regenerative agriculture and regenerative forestry. So this is whole catchment-based approaches to how do we actually get the water back into the soil, which then increases the term anti-fragility, not just resilience. So if a hurricane wipes out the whole crop, the water and the nutrients are still in the soil, we can plant immediately, whereas with a greenhouse, it might get blown away in the next hurricane. So those sorts of issues, and that's obviously anticipatory whole systems design within those places that are ready for it. So that's one of the things I'm trying to do at the moment.
Awesome.
Great, thanks. And yeah, I'll post links below in the comments for the studies that I've mentioned during the chat. And also would just like to say thanks very much for having me. It's been great to be part of it.
I'm really honoured you guys took the invitation. I really appreciate that. And also thanks to everyone who's watching for your warm responses, your thank yous. I'm just reading, appearing. Yeah, honoured, and thanks. That's all from me.
Super. Thank you very much, everyone. Get on the Facebook group. Let's start that feedback loop happening.
Yeah, and we hope that this has been quite exciting for you guys as well. I certainly feel energized from connecting with these people and making so many friends and contacts. And so let's keep the ball rolling. Let's keep this momentum up. Thank you again so much to our guests for joining, including Mexi, who left us earlier. Do check out her YouTube channel. It's got some really interesting things going on there. And I'll have to check out her Vegan Vanguard podcast as well. Thank you very much, guys. We're going to go offline now. Speakers, you can continue to stay online, and we'll just say thank you again. Bye. Give everyone.
See you later. See you soon in 2 or 4 weeks.
Ciao.